Hey everyone, welcome to a good football show. I am Matt Stroup. It is Thursday, June 16th, and today we're going to dive into some team fantasy previews. The Cardinals, Falcons, Ravens, and Bills are on our agenda. To do this, I'm joined by Pat Kerrane, Kyle Dvorchak, and Pat Daugherty, who, speaking of team previews, had one of the all-time devastating snafus this week. Pat, would you like to tell everyone what you did and how you're recovering? How are things? Let's just check in.
Yeah, I wrote 80% of the Chicago Bears team preview for Thursday, knowing that it was only the third team in our team preview. I was like, wow, I thought there were more teams higher than the Chicago in the NFL alphabet. And but I just didn't double check it and continued to write about Velus Jones. And I was up to 2,000 words on Velus Jones.
Yeah.
For Raymond Summerlin texted me and just gave me like a cursory reminder, like, hey, get that. Remember, you have the Ravens to post today. And that's when
you could you feel it like in your throat? You get that like tightness as soon as that happens. The most disgusting. And it's not like you got like the Bills, right? We'll talk about the Bills today. If you did that, you'd be like, well, I feel good about the work I did, right? You don't feel good after writing up the Bears. You got to
at least you're prepared for your fantasy season. You know,
it's true. Yeah,
you know who not to draft exactly.
Well, yeah, no, don't worry. I'll be drafting David Montgomery again for reasons unknown.
And I just traded for him in Dynasty, as it turns out.
Congrats. You even said that, I think Denny, you said, had that one and had already finished it, right?
Well, if it had been literally anyone else on staff, I would have known that they hadn't started it yet. But when I saw it was Denny, I knew that was ominous. And then I asked Ray, and yeah, he had already finished. He said, for reasons unknown, he had already sent him all 4 of his team previews, which isn't part of the protocol, actually. And so Denny had already completed his Bears, so it's not like I could trade or anything. So a lot of wasted Chicago Bears research out there. And the world, you know, will just never know my thoughts on Byron Pringle in a Bears uniform. So it's really quite a travesty.
I had heard that you were going to publish your thoughts on Velus Jones in like an ebook, though. Is that still going to proceed ahead?
First, I say Velus. No, it is Velus.
I was told by producer Adam just now it's Velus. He seemed pretty upset about.
Yeah, the ebook is retailing for $2.99 on Amazon, and there's some days where it's discounted $2.99 if you can do the math there. So we have an ebook.
I'm glad you went that route because the original proposal was that you read us the preview as this podcast.
Right. It's the entire podcast. Like it's June 16th. Maybe just read us your entire Velus Jones manifesto.
Okay, so the first line says published at 10:15 a.m. Wednesday, line by line. The title header is Bears team preview.
I was just say I've worked here 11 years. I had never ever done the wrong team. I think what happened was that I had the Bears last year, and I think it was on June 15th, and I somehow looked at last year's schedule like 2 weeks ago and just got it in my head that I had the Bears. But yeah, never making that mistake again. Didn't need an extra Bears primetime game in my life, and writing a Bears preview is like 5 Bears primetime games.
You'd almost feel better if you'd made that mistake in like year 3, though. When you make it in year 11, it's kind of alarming because it might suggest that you're actually.
Well, yeah, Ray said I was the only person he didn't like even think he really needed to remind. And
dude, Ray needs to remind me. I have to check every 2 days.
But he needed to check in.
It's weird, yeah, because I was doing the work. It was just the wrong work. And of course, Denny, who can never stop writing, writes 20 out of 24 hours a day. Had finished his 2022 Bears preview on June 13th, 2021. So he'd had it in the can for over 365 days.
My God. I have the Bengals preview due on Tuesday. And so I have work to do on Tuesday.
I was going to say, I'm guessing the word count so far is zero.
It's a big old zero. Yeah. And I'll be triple checking it that I actually have the Bengals.
Bengals preview, 2 words down.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you got the Bengals and the preview in there. You didn't have the fantasy in there yet, though. It's supposed to be Bengals fantasy preview. So if you want to like looking for ways to pad the word count, that fantasy gets it up to 3. So.
Yeah, that's always my problem, Pat. I'm always trying to pad the word.
Yeah, count. I know. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
I feel like for a team like the Bears, it could be like you get 400 words of it, and you're like, these aren't the best players. So the history of fantasy started in 1975.
I basically did recount Justin Fields' life story and how he he was pretty aggressive down the field, had a high average depth of target, but how they don't really have anyone at all to take advantage of that. And how it's how Velus Jones is a 38-year-old rookie. He's the oldest NFL rookie since Brandon Weeden. And
this is how it begins, but you're well on your way to actually just reading us what you wrote. you're just working your way into it right now.
I think we should let him do it.
Let's fire it up. Yeah, let's fire it up.
It'd be such catharsis for you, Pat.
I'm potentially down. The after show, Pat Daugherty will read his preview. All right, let's get into these team previews, and we're going to start in the NFC with the Arizona Cardinals, a preview that was written by Pat Kerrane for a team he was actually assigned to cover. And we obviously can't cover everything in these extensive previews, but we're going to just try to hit some high points. And let's start with the passing game, specifically Kyler Murray. As you wrote, Kerrane, and as many fantasy managers remember, when he returned from his ankle injury in Week 13, he was not the same player we saw earlier in the season. So how much do you factor that in when you rank Murray this season? Like, are you kind of just putting all that aside? I think it was a second straight year we kind of saw a drop-off for him down the stretch.
Yeah, and we saw it post-ankle injury, which I think matters. And Hopkins also was out after Week 10. He'll obviously miss the first 6 weeks of this season, but he does have Marquise Brown joining the team. I think Kyler Murray this year is a bit of a value because he flashed a ceiling last year. He flashed like a breakout into a true elite quarterback. And then he wasn't that down the stretch. And I feel like people are kind of middling that, but it's like, don't middle it. Make a certain percentage of bets that he is that guy, stack them up, play for the upside, because I do think that there are scenarios where, Kyler Murray with Hopkins back, with Marquise Brown, they played together at Oklahoma. You got to mention that.
Don't know if you heard about anybody else hear about this?
Yeah.
Not another week of this.
7 minutes. If you had 7 minutes, under 7 minutes, you just cash that ticket.
Cash that one, baby. It was free money too.
They have Trey McBride, this interesting pass-catching tight end rookie, the number one tight end in the class. They have Zach Ertz, who is a solid check-down underneath type of guy. Rondale Moore has some potential to break out in the slot role. And like, AJ Green is like a decent, like if he's like your number 4 or 5 like weapon, that's like actually pretty solid. So they definitely have, I think, a fair bit of upside to recapture some of that early season magic.
Pat Kerrane, I want to throw this to you because I thought this was interesting last year. It was ironically after the ankle injury, and I think it didn't happen to have any bearing on it, that he actually began running. In the first 8, I believe, games before he went down with the ankle injury, he was on pace for like 300 rushing yards. That's nothing for a player who's like as elite of an athlete as Kyler Murray. And the thing was, and this was my interpretation, for whatever reason, I don't think the ankle just made a big difference, as he was just passing so lights out. He's on pace for nearly 5,000 yards. It was like 4,800 yards, 36 touchdowns through those first 8 weeks. Like you said, he wasn't just a good fantasy player. He was like an elite thrower of the football through 8 weeks. But do you find, and I think there were 7-1 in those first 8 games. Do you find the idea that his rushing production and his passing production are like mutually exclusive, right? If he's going to light it up through the air, they won't throw with him. And I think that makes sense strategically because he was playing so well. But do you think that's true? And more importantly, that would obviously be like a pretty big limiting factor from him reaching like number 1 overall status. He could totally go like top 2, 3, 4, 5. But I do think like we're at an age where we almost have to have either the best passer by a wide margin or more likely to Josh Allen, where you run super well and pass just as well.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of those as mutually exclusive, but I do think the upside case for Kyler probably rests more on the passing game than him like just out rushing everybody. I mean, like I said, with Marquise Brown, Rondale, Hopkins back, I think you're playing for like almost a reverse of last season where maybe he gets a little off to a slower start. And then at the end of the season, everything's clicking through the air. But I think at that point, like, yeah, maybe he doesn't end up as the quarterback 1, but he's certainly someone that you're going to love having stacked in those final weeks of all your tournaments and stuff. If he's clicking with all of his weapons.
The only thing that is weird about the late season like fades each of the past years was it does play into like his biggest pre-draft concern, which was his size. And 2020 was the shoulder. Last year was the ankle, which like Kyle said, like weirdly, he actually did run more after the ankle injury. He didn't score any rushing touchdowns. That's kind of fluky after the ankle injury, but he averaged 22.1 fantasy points during the fantasy playoffs, which isn't like a catastrophic number, but that was 5 off what he averaged before the injury. So just a huge dip in real life and fantasy production. And it was also weird with the Cardinals that they weathered like DeAndre Hopkins' like first injury absence, like weirdly well. Like they didn't really miss a beat. And then when he went out the second time, it was like they just ran out of ideas. And that's like the other big Kyler Murray concern is Cliff Kingsbury. When people get hurt like when stuff kind of goes off kilter, they like for some reason always fall back on this horizontal offense, like so horizontal. And it's just like totally unwatchable. And as remember that, the first Monday night playoff game, they just get like run out of the building by the Rams. And so it's 2 years in a row we've had the Cliff sabotage and like the injury sabotage. And those are two pretty big concerns that Kyler has not settled. But you're absolutely right. He has number one overall quarterback upside. And he's he's proven as an elite runner. He's really an elite passer, at least down, like in terms of like big plays, at least he has like that kind of upside, and just need to put it all together and not become a complete pumpkin for the most important fantasy games of the season, Kyler.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you about the Cliff stuff. I mean, you do wish that he was in a position where we felt like, if things are kind of at the precipice of him becoming this ultra elite guy, that the coaching could push him over the edge. And instead it's almost the reverse, where it's like he could be right there and you almost feel like the coaching will hold him back.
Why horizontal, Cliff? That's really what I want to know.
It's the baseball thing where analytics come into baseball and people are like, oh, this is sick, we're pushing the game forward, and then you realize that's not fun. It turns out it was bad. And I don't think throwing 2-yard screens on every play is perfectly analytical. We do think about like the air raid is the analytics type of stuff, and we're like, oh no, not like that, not analytics like that, do it in a cool way. And Cliff just refuses, man. It is, like you said, unwatchable.
Do the good analytics. When it comes to those pass catchers occasionally catching horizontal passes, as Kerrane wrote, Marquise Brown should operate as the top outside receiver, while DeAndre Hopkins is, I don't know what just happened, but I just had an event, but is suspended, while Rondale Moore will have a chance to redeem himself after his disappointing rookie year. So Kerrane, Daugherty, what's your outlook on these Arizona pass catchers? Who are you high on? Who are you less high on? Who do you care about, not care about, et cetera? And I'm going to go figure out what just happened with my sinuses.
Well, my initial outlook on the Arizona pass catchers was I was in Alabama last week with Raymond Summerlin and Ed Williams editing our draft guide. I was like, the Cardinals depth chart still has AJ Green on it. We need to delete that from the magazine. And he was like, no. It was like they re-signed him. And I was like, oh, what? So yeah, if you want to know my thoughts on AJ Green, how I feel about it, that I'm so unmoved by the AJ Green re-signing that I had memory hold it and totally forgotten about it. No offense to Josh Norris.
You actually did delete him from the magazine anyways, right?
Yeah, no, we did anyway. Yeah. We don't really care about being accurate. It's not like that big of a deal.
Right.
Look, it didn't pass the vibe check. The magazine has to be somewhat accurate, but the peak of it is passing the vibe check. And dude, AJ Green did not pass the vibe check, so he had to get out of there.
Didn't pass the vibe check at all. Trey McBride, who Kerrane mentioned earlier, a really interesting young draft pick, and Cliff Kingsbury, he entered the NFL. I never could fully confirm this stat, but I 2 or 3 times, I believe, double checked this at the time. It seemed almost impossible to leave, so I didn't really want to believe it. But the Cliff's final season at Texas Tech, they literally didn't target a tight end. I could never. I was always in my mind, but the straight up did not feature tight ends in the Red Raiders offense. And he's definitely come full circle on that, where they're featuring Max Williams for a while last year. Then they really featured Zach Ertz. They aggressively invested in Trey McBride. Trey McBride is kind of interesting. It's weird because, of course, it's tight end is notoriously difficult for rookies, and he's the number 2 tight end on his team. But someone I'm pretty interested in dynasty leagues, and I am interested in Marquise Brown, who has become a very divisive, polarizing fantasy player for obvious reasons. But it's weird. Kyler has never really had, I feel a perfect downfield weapon. We kind of picture DeAndre Hopkins that way. But DeAndre Hopkins, usually you got to do it in traffic, which Kyler's been willing to do. And DeAndre will win those tough one-on-one assignments with his physicality. But we sort of seen that started kind of go in the second half of 2020. It was definitely kind of gone last year. And Marquise Brown, he's the kind of deep threat where he doesn't need to win a hand fight. He will just run right by you. And I think it could be a really, really good fit with Kyler Murray, as it was in Oklahoma. And I am pretty bullish on the long-awaited, long-foretold Hollywood Brown breakout in Arizona.
One thing I'll say, too, about the horizontal raid stuff is that I was actually surprised because the horizontal raid is such a narrative in the fantasy community because I think, rightly feel that the offense could be better than it is and could have some deeper throws. But it's, I think, more that there's just such a plethora of shallow throws rather than a lack of deep throws. So if you're concerned about Marquise Brown joining the horizontal raid, I don't know. Maybe he'll be fine because Murray attempted 20-plus yard throws at the 5th highest rate last year, ranking 5th in adjusted completion percentage on deep throws. He's a very talented deep thrower, and he actually attempted a lot of them. So it's almost more like they need to figure out a way to get some more intermediate throws in there, and it's kind of those screens and checkdowns and dump offs that are making this the horizontal rate.
Yeah, I went to the college football reference page and got 15 pass catchers deep, and I didn't see a tight end. So
I'm telling you, I could never really believe that stat, but I'm pretty sure Cliff's final season at Texas Tech, they did not target a tight end. That's a real stat.
Yeah, and like you pointed out, it's probably not predictive. I'm guessing they didn't have.
No, and it's come. I'm saying it's weird how far away he's gone from that.
Yeah, which is sort of my way of leading into saying I'm a little interested in Zach Ertz. I know last year he was just such a steal because he's old and dusty and no one wanted to draft him for anything. Now we actually have some sort of idea that, well, yeah, he's still the catch and fall down guy, but he catches a lot of passes, and that's worth something, especially as long as you're not in a complete no points for receptions league. And we saw, especially down the stretch, he became an integral part of the offense whenever they were without DeAndre Hopkins, which would be the case for the start of the 2022 season. He added 3 targets and 2.5 PPR points to his stat line last year when playing without Hopkins. So I think it's probably going to be maybe Marquise Brown changes this, but I think it's more of what Kerrane said, is that there will be some sick deep shots to Marquise Brown, and then there will be nothing for the next 10 yards working your way towards the quarterback. And then those next 5 yards right in front of the line of scrimmage, that's where it's going to be the targets. Some deep, maybe more than average deep, and so many more than average short. And that's perfect for the Zach Ertz game.
Real quick, Kerrane, I think the reason the horizontal raid is so triggering too is I feel like Kyler is much more apt to get his passes batted on those throws. That's kind of where short Kyler comes into play more, is it's easier to bat a ball that, it's not going to have much elevation on it. Mm-hmm. And that was another reason why I think it was just so awful to watch.
And when that throws to Rondale Moore, it's it's
the aesthetics are not good
above the ground. So
yeah.
All right, let's get to this Cardinals running game. Chase Edmonds gone. James Conner has a new contract at age 27. Coming off a year where he had 18 total touchdowns. Kyle, how much are you worried about the old touchdown regression when it comes to Conner's fantasy outlook this upcoming year?
Yeah, if you were being priced as if I had to look this up, I knew he scored a lot. He scored 18 touchdowns. That is a lot of touchdowns. I was it was probably a dozen. Would have been my guess, not even close.
It was the age guessing games, I think. Missed a couple games too.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the age guessing game, right? You think you're shooting high. I'm how old is this player? I try and shoot high, and you're not high enough. It was the thing with touchdowns, and he scored 18. The thing was, he was in a position to score a lot of touchdowns per PFF's expected touchdown metric. He was still at 11 and almost 1 through the air. And that was while only playing roughly a little over half the season as that 6'3" down James Conner player we saw in the second half of the season. So if we get that for a full season, or at least on a per game basis, we get it for the entire season that he's healthy for, God hope it's for the whole season, because he's actually really good as the 3-down back. Yeah, I think he can still push over a dozen. I think he can exceed my guess for him this past year pretty easily. And he's not being priced as if he's going to be Jonathan Taylor scoring 20 touchdowns, right? He's being priced reasonably by the market, and there's room for over exceeding the expectations, right? Just because it is a really good offense, and they, despite us maybe not liking it, play more balanced than we'd like. So it gives him a lot of opportunities as touchdowns. And he was a really good pass catcher this year, at least in terms of just going out and playing the full 3-down, heavily targeted role. And I don't really think they have players behind him as good as Chase Edmonds. So if the market was pricing it in, I'd be concerned. I think the market's pretty fair and maybe even leaving a little room for upside on him.
I think the biggest concern with him is that Darrell Williams is bad at everything on the ground. So there's no reason to have Darrell Williams active if he's not going to be out there on passing downs. Now, maybe they just have Conner as a full workhorse, but that hasn't really been the philosophy of this team. So Conner was not particularly efficient last year as a rusher.
Or as a pass catcher.
Yeah. He was actually a little bit better as a pass catcher, Conner.
He was 3.7. He averaged 10 yards per catch. He averaged under 8 or under 7 the previous 2 years. So I was biased against his final Steelers numbers. Never mind.
There was a showdown slate where he had 2 or 3 really long catches. Some of them split out wide too, where he looked like a legit slot receiver. He had some good plays. He is the typical jack of all trades, master of none, right? He's a good banger between the tackles. He's not breaking long runs. He's probably not breaking a lot, like juking out a lot of defenders, right? But he can handle typically a pretty big workload, at least in spurts. So that's why I like him. I don't think he's, Alvin Kamara or anything.
I think he would have been better off if they had added someone who's like very clearly a 2-down guy, and then he would have been like getting the receiving workload of that, and then mixing in probably around the goal line, getting all the high value touches. I'd be a lot more excited about Connor. I've taken him. He's falling now. He's falling into like the late third round, sometimes like the 3-4 turn. I think that's totally fine, and I've taken him there. But I think the days of getting him within that group of like Fournette, Barkley, Javonte, I think he's in a like kind of a little mini tier beyond those guys, and the ADP now reflects that.
All right, quickly, as we're going to do when we reach the end of the line on each of these teams, the over-under on the win total, according to PointsBet, is 8.5. Kerrane, what have you taken? Let's go around the room with what you've got and why you've got it.
I took the over. I feel like 8.5 is you basically think, are the Cardinals a winning team? I think they will be a winning team. I think Kingsbury will cost them probably at least a game, but Kyler will make up for that, and they'll have a winning record.
I feel like they're just going to go 0.5 over their total every year of their existence and just keep lose a first-round playoff game every year. So, yeah, it's the division. I feel like it's not going to be as bruising as it was last year with the Seahawks waving the white flag and the 49ers kind of in transition. So I will take the over.
Yeah, I have that as well. I like the idea of Cliff being just like millennial Jeff Fisher, right? Just good enough to get this team to between 7 and 9 on a really good year, 10 wins, and then bow out of the playoffs in 1 or 2 weeks.
All right, now to the next preview that you also wrote, Kerrane, and it is the fantasy goldmine that is the Atlanta Falcons. Now, as you put it, the Falcons' passing game, quote, could be more frisky than expected, and the Falcons do have some premium weapons in the passing game. And yes, I cherry-picked the positive info out of the preview. So let's talk about those guys, though, starting with the two most intriguing guys on this roster by far, Kyle Pitts and Drake London. I want to get everyone's thoughts on the outlook for these two, but we'll start with you, Kerrane.
Yeah, I mean, that's the place to start. I even think Kyle Pitts is more fun and exciting to talk about even than Drake London, just because we're getting a second year with Kyle Pitts. We had a really strong prospect profile on Kyle Pitts coming in, but obviously what they did as a rookie is also hugely valuable for us projecting them going forward. And he had an exceptional rookie year. He only had 1 touchdown. And I think that's kind of coloring it in people's minds a little bit, that it wasn't this amazing rookie season, but I really think it was. He had over 1,000 yards. He had 2.02 yards per route run, becoming one of 5 rookie tight ends with 50+ targets to have a yards per route run of 1.9 or better. The other guys are Zach Ertz, Rob Gronkowski, Mark Andrews, and Jordan Reed. I mean, this is like the breakout tight end profiles. It's looking like the type of guy who might be the tight end 1 in fantasy in 2023, and then for like the next 10 years after that. Like that's, he's got that kind of like, oh my God, this might be really something special. And so with that tight end eligibility, him being truly a wide receiver, he doesn't pass block. He wasn't like that high in routes run out of the slot, because he also runs routes out wide. He's a true wide receiver. Like it's actually like probably a little screwed up that we even have him as a tight end. Like, for contract. Like when he gets his second contract, like he should argue he's a wide receiver, which he is. So we'll see if that lasts. But I'm super excited about Pitts. I think the real question is like, can the quarterback play support him? I think London, a very strong prospect as well, could have a really nice rookie year. I'm a little more concerned about him just because I don't have this additional data point of him already being really, really good.
The one, by the way, on Pitts, have you seen that he's claiming that he's literally faster this offseason? Christian McCaffrey did this one offseason where he said, I got faster. And Kyle Pitts is now claiming he is physically faster.
But which offseason did McCaffrey say that in? Because it might be good information if it happened
not worth
like 3
looking
years
up.
ago.
Yeah, don't look it up.
Kyle Pitts, before I hear from anyone else here, is extremely young. He's still only 21.
Yes.
So maybe he's getting faster. Pat, it happens.
Only Sammy Watkins and Matthew Stafford are younger than him amongst NFL skill players. So
I really like the point Kerrane made that I think Drake London is good, right? But man, I know Kyle Pitts is good. I mean, like you said, it was one of the best rookie tight end seasons ever. And the fact that he didn't score touchdowns, the one thing that we kind of all universally agree is like, sure, some players can score more or less on average, but it is the flukiest of the stats that we care about that he didn't do well. But it could have been like the best, tight end rookie fantasy season of all time if he had just run good as opposed to bad on touchdowns. Well, so I don't think the touchdown opportunity is going to be great on this passing attack, but I think it could be better than last year. At least his bad luck could be better than last year. So we know he is just supremely talented. He plays a position that is weak, and he does not actually play that position in real life. Imagine him getting his franchise tag, and then also like Pat Freiermuth, because they'll be the same year, right? Both getting their franchise tags. I would be so tilted if I were Kyle Pitts. I just couldn't handle it looking over at the same application. So yeah, I just have a supreme level of confidence that Pitts is like 100% an alpha level receiver, just playing tight end. I think Drake London is probably that, but it's just a much larger room for error, much less confidence.
Well, two quick thoughts there with the Pitts and the touchdowns. I mean, it's a bad offensive environment, obviously, but I do think a lot of that probably was Matt Ryan, who just rather infamously will not pull the trigger on those like tough throws in the red zone when his alpha weapon, is like double or triple teamed. Just ask Julio Jones how that went. And Drake London, I still can't quite decide how I feel about him. Or if you watched him in college, like there was some like N'Keal Harry there where there's like always someone like glued to him. But unlike N'Keal Harry, he's like a pretty subtle mover, like kind of a savvy operator where he seems much more adept at whereas N'Keal Harry kind of just ended up being like a big receiver. I feel like Drake London is like a much savvier player. And I think he could actually win with his style in the pro. It's a low margin for error, but he seems like he's maybe like a savvy enough, technically good player from a technical perspective where he can make it work in the NFL.
All right, let's move to this backfield now. Last year was obviously a breakout for Cordero Patterson, emerged with 1,166 total yards from scrimmage and 11 total touchdowns. But we may, if you believe what you read, be trending toward a world where Patterson is more of a receiver and fifth-round rookie Tyler Algier potentially becomes the main backfield guy. Pat Daugherty, first you, and then we'll go around the room as well. How do you see this shaking out, and how much do you care about those two guys I just mentioned?
There seems to be more and more smoke to the CPAT stuff where who was so gassed he like just stayed home from the entire offseason program. Like he's like still tired from carrying the ball into the last season. And as we know, he was there, the coaching staff and he by the end of the year was like, yeah, it was like he's just really tired. Like he's never done this before. And it's taken quite a toll. And even though it's pretty successful for a while, the team is kind of like just outwardly like coming out and saying like, yeah, that was lightning in a bottle. That's not going to happen again. Like the reason it could happen is because it is such an untalented backfield, as we know. Like it's Damian Williams right now, who got easily jumped on the depth chart by Khalil Herbert in Chicago last year, and then of course rookie Tyler Algier, who is 4.6 speed, but definitely profiles as the best guy on early downs for the Falcons. The concern with Algier though is like, so yeah, the competition's not good. The backfield's not good, but that could include him. And like, you can't ever assume this with like a day 3 rookie, like where it could easily be one of those situations where the back who's going to lead the team and carries or snaps, like isn't even on the roster yet. Like it's just a really, really, really unintriguing group of players. And so Tyler, this like the dots connect, but just know like dots connecting is like not an article of faith. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. That's all it is you're connecting dots. So the setup is good on paper for Tyler Algier, but there's still a lot of hoops to clear for the young man who is a 4.6 40.
And I do think with the Algier stuff, like Patterson's better off if Algier's okay. He's not. Yes. You don't want Algier to be awesome. But I think he's better off if Algier's okay, because one of the things we saw last year is Mike Davis's snaps really declined as the season went on. And I think that hurt Patterson. I think Patterson's better off if they have kind of a guy who's not horrifically efficient in the backfield that they can lean on as a traditional running back, and then it frees up Patterson to be used more as a receiver, which is how he's going to win us leagues if he's a receiver with running back eligibility. I mean, this whole team is a scam. They're all just receivers who have wrong eligibility. So this is the only way we can get fantasy points out of this team.
We better, on that note, get the Marcus Mariota batted pass back to himself to complete the scam trinity, right? Because he did that playoff game versus Kansas City.
By the way, they're pumped about his leadership. By the way, the Falcons said on Thursday they're really pumped about Mariota's leadership. So,
I had to leave. Go ahead,
Stroup. No, I was gonna say supposedly he's had a good mini camp like 3 days, right? But he had a good mini camp, and Ritter not as much of one. So on this team, maybe worth mentioning that it looks like we're gonna. I mean, what are we betting on for like the amount of games started for Marcus Mariota? Like I think I actually to help out with our projections like guesstimated like 14 or 15. Like I don't know. These like unless you're like a high first round pick, it is really difficult to get on the field for much time as a rookie.
He'll get on the field just because after 7 or 8 games, Marcus Mariota will like pull his calf or something. And so even if they don't want to necessarily make the change, Ritter will make rookie starts, like almost an ironclad.
Yeah, I think so too. But I'm kind of with you, Kyle, that it won't be a ton. The Falcons offensive line ranked 31st in pass blocking grade last year, and looking into Ritter's profile, I was reminded just how bad he was under pressure. Took sacks at a Christian Hackenberg level rate.
Oh no.
He ranked second percentile in adjusting completion percentage under pressure. So I don't think he's the type of guy you really want if they can't pass block. Now maybe they pass block better. It's the same unit. And maybe they gel a little bit more. So, but I think Mariota, like he might come back. Like Ritter, it might be like Ritter time, and then they're like, oh no, this was a bad idea.
Yeah,
and bring back Mariota. So
that was like with Zach Wilson. Like they were like, wow, he's probably healthy this week. We're going to give him 3 more weeks to recover from this injury, just because, not because Mike White was playing better, just because in general,
right.
Just right. Yeah, I could very much see that. That's a scenario that could play out. Kerrane, what do you think about taking Algier and Cordero Patterson on the same team? Because I think what you said about the way we want Cordero Patterson to use was very important. That like we saw, he ended up by the end of the season, I believe Next Gen Stats had him charted as the most stacked box rate a running back faced. Right, he was just a between the tackles banger, and there's not much else to say about it. It was terrible for him. That's not what we want from him. We want him to be the running back side of Deebo Samuel, and to do that, you can't have Mike Davis running at like 2.9 yards per carry. You need someone competent in the backfield, and I think for that reason there might be like a little bit of positive correlation that one role helps feed the other one, and they're super cheap, right? It's not like you don't need to capture the whole backfield to get your money's back on Cordero Patterson.
Yeah, I guess it's still like a little expensive to take them if it's a normal situation, and so I hadn't really thought to do that, but it's definitely not a normal situation to your point. And we had a ton of opportunity for Mike Davis in this backfield. I believe 197 opportunities that he saw last year, 196. That's carries plus targets. That's a fair amount. And that's like with them being, scaling him back and basically pulling him from, that kind of like, basically a starter role that he had to kind of more of a committee guy. So Algier, who has some big play potential, he only runs a 4.6, but he's a bigger breakaway kind of Jordan Howard-y type, young Jordan Howard type of back. Where it's like
anytime you can draft the next Jordan Howard.
Got to do it.
These are some cuts. The Jordan Howard was good back in the day, but the Jordan Howard comp, the Hackenberg, these are some cuts from Kerrane.
I mean, yeah, really. I had to leave for a little mic crackling issue, and I wish I just stayed out. This has just been awful to hear you guys body slam my team like this, but I get it.
Well, now I know I'm saying some good things. Algier, okay. I think, who is a running back with running back eligibility, so it's going to be tough because he's actually going to have to score like his position. But he can get there, I think, with some big plays, and then you're also banking on big plays from Patterson. So taking both and then hoping that basically you have a slot receiver in Patterson. And Algier is a running back, then they're not cannibalizing each other. They're actually helping each other. And man, there's really nothing here behind Drake London in the wide receiver room. I mean, like I listed Geronimo Allison on this depth chart because we have to go 6 wide receivers deep. Geronimo Allison was written on a fantasy preview in 2022, guys. I mean, it's like rough. It's rough.
That's
shape.
Still better than the Bears and Ravens receiver situations, by the way.
Demir Bird was also listed. I wrote the name Auden.
Yeah, he's also better than the Bears and Ravens receivers.
Those names all made the magazine, though, if I'm not mistaken.
And Auden Tate could be a position switcher because there's always rumors that he'll play tight ends. He's so big and slow.
Okay.
All right. Well, I regret that we have to do this, but the points bet win total over under is 4.5 for the Falcons. I'm going to shield my eyes, cover my ears for this section. We'll start with you, Kerrane. I already know what you did, so let's go ahead with you.
Yeah, I was dismayed to see how bad Mariota was before getting benched for Ryan Tannehill. Back in 2019, I had forgotten just how bad he was. Less accurate than Kyle Allen and Mason Rudolph that season. I've taken the under here, guys. They were not a good team last year. They won a lot more games than their win total or than their point differential would have suggested. So I'm taking the under.
Kyle, you go, because I'm going to try to look up a stat.
No, the tight ends, they didn't catch any passes. I already checked that one out. No, I'll take over because it's such an incredibly low number. And when you get to face, I assume Sam Darnold one time, maybe two times, or maybe zero, but that is also not good. And then I don't think the Saints are a particularly strong team either. Bucks should rout them two times, but it's a relatively weak, NFC South, and it's such a low total. 4.5 games is not a lot of games. I think just like in the bell curve distribution, even if you're a bad team, you should probably win like 5. I don't know. So I'll take.
They're getting 6. They're getting 6. Mark it down. 6 and 11.
All right.
So real quick, speaking to Kerrane, talking about the Falcons were not as good as their record indicated last year. I believe they were 7-10. They went 0-7 with a negative 159 point differential against playoff teams. So
159 is a lot of points.
Yeah, in 7 games. And I think the Falcons are taking the under on 4.5 because this is just a ghastly roster, including at quarterback. And Desmond Ridder is not good either. He's like fundamentally sound from like the way he's like sets his feet, and that's like kind of it. And the whole thing, the entire case for the over will rest on Marcus Mariota being the player he appeared to be like during his Raiders bit duty, where he was like much more aggressive as a runner and as a passer. The rare times he got to attempt throws, like seemed to be playing with an entirely different mentality. You know, he's kind of like famously passive during his time in Tennessee, especially as a runner. But yeah, it's just not a good roster at all.
The Raiders, as they say, he got that dog in him. He found a dog.
He did have the dog in him on the Raiders. You got to give him credit for that.
He did play fun. It was like another.
It was different.
A showdown slate. I remember he came in at like halftime ish and ended up like winning people a ton of money. And I wasn't tilting, and I wouldn't do that.
I mean, Arthur Smith can run some version of his Tannehill offense at least through Mariota. You can't roll out Matt Ryan. You cannot read option with Matt Ryan.
That's true. He tried to. He ran a lot of play action. One last nail in the coffin here. They have the 23rd hardest schedule, or the 23rd easiest schedule. So a fairly difficult schedule, according to Warren Sharp. So they're going to have a tough go of it.
All right, fine. 5 games. I'm down to 5. I'm 6-5.
We're just haggling over Matt's games.
All right, we have 2 more previews to hit. First, we're going to take a quick break. And this is just a reminder, if you don't have the NBC Sports Predictor app powered by PointsBet, go download it now. The contests are free and easy to play, and you have a shot to win thousands by predicting what will happen in the NBA playoffs, on the PGA Tour, and NASCAR circuit. We also have a special contest Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's called Battle of the Bets, where you can agree or disagree with our experts for a shot to collect some cash. All right, it is now a preview written by our very own Pat Daugherty. It's not the Bears preview, it's the Ravens preview. Pat, we made it. Congratulations. How are you feeling now? We're about halfway into this. Do you feel like you've healed from your Bears mistake?
Well, I do, but it ended up being a mistake for the entire website because we had to go out of alphabetical order. We posted the Bills on Wednesday and then posted the Ravens on Thursday because thankfully Zach Kruger already had his Bills preview in the can. But I'm not sure. I like symmetry. I like order. And I will be haunted by the teams being out of order for the rest of the summer.
All right. We've heard heavy rumblings of a impending change of philosophy for this team, Pat, specifically a change back to their old philosophy, which obviously is very directly tied to the outlook for Lamar Jackson and this passing game. So hit us, first of all, just with your thoughts on the setup for Lamar this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, they've made no secret of what they're going to do, where they're going back to the future, basically, of what worked in 2019 and 2020, because the shift last year, as everyone knows by now, was not by choice, going from run heavy to, like one of the league's pass heaviest teams. Tends to happen when you lose your top 2 running backs for a single down of real football is played. And the Ravens run rate was 54% in 2019. It was 55% in 2020. That went all the way down to 44% last year. Lamar Jackson only averaged 26 passing attempts per game in 2019 and 2020. That spiked all the way to 32 last year. And as we know, it just didn't work. That's not the way this team is built. It's especially not the way this team is built now that Marquise Brown has been traded. Rashad Bateman, at least he was a first-round pick, but is the only viable receiver. Devin Duvernay is like a wind sprinter, basically, who has like 50 catches in 2 years, like seemingly no certifiable NFL skills other than being very fast, which is an important one to have, of course. And Tylan Wallace was kind of like a dynasty sleeper last year. He was very, very productive at Oklahoma State. It was kind of like a contested catch artist, but didn't produce as a rookie. He's already pretty old for a sophomore. He was a former day 3 pick, so it's not like he has like draft capital really working in his favor. And as they should be doing. The Ravens literally drafted a center in the first round. I mean, they are going all back in on the run, as they should be doing. And like the car got thrown in reverse last year, not by choice, and they are definitely pulling another 180 for 2022 with the approach.
Yeah, they had, I'd say they had probably one of the weaker receiving rooms in the NFL. I think Rashad Bateman breaks out. Like, I think he's talented enough to do so. They'll have a below average one because they just don't have anyone behind him, assuming you're not counting Mark Andrews as a receiver. Like, he does play that type of role. But, and so what did they do in the draft? They took offensive linemen, tight ends, and a running back, like their 6th round pick, right? They made it very clear that, one, this was a positive takeaway from this. They have a lot of faith in Rashad Bateman, right? That's a pretty bold thing to do, is to have what I think we can all kind of agree is at least a shallow. I think that he could be a good top receiver, but not much to work with behind him, and say, you know what? We got one final pick. We've only taken tight ends and linemen on offense. Spend it on a running back when we're getting 2 running backs back. So I think that's a vote of confidence in Bateman, which I like. I also think it's a very, very clear indication that they assume that once they're healthy, they had maybe the most injured defense in the league last year, lost like multiple all-pro corners. I think 5 or 6 guys in their secondary alone ended the year on IR. It was very obvious that they just weren't in a position to play the typical Raven style. They think they're getting back to that. And they should. Injury luck was terrible for them. So I like what the draft said for Bateman a little bit, but also it makes it very clear that they're going back to the style they played in 2019 and 2020.
Real quick before Kerrane jumps in, speaking of the point Kyle made about injuries, the Buffalo News at the end of the year tried to chart the amount of games lost to injury in 2021, and the Ravens had the 2nd most in the league after somehow the Lions had more. I would have guessed the Ravens had by far the most, but as Kyle alluded to, just like a biblically injured team last year.
Yeah, the thing is the Ravens actually lost good players. Lions didn't have good players to start with.
What you going to do?
I think with Bateman, they could end up being one like the team that signs Julio Jones or something, just because the guys behind Bateman are, I think you described it as an eyesore, Pat, in the article.
Well, I described Devin Duvernay's career yards per catch of 8.9 as an eyesore, which that'd be pretty good for a running back. For a wide receiver, it's like you're going to be on the street soon.
It is like pretty wild because like looking at, you're like, oh, Devin Duvernay's been so bad he can't play, and then you go and look at like Prochet and you're like, well, maybe he'll play. And Tylan Wallace was terrible. So I think that like it would just make sense for them to sign Julio, which makes you feel like probably a little bit worse about Bateman. His projection will come down. But I don't know that something like that would really affect Mark Andrews a ton, because I do think he's the number 1 here. Pat, it jumped out to me. You said you thought he should be the consensus number 1 tight end, not in his own tier, but the consensus number 1. He is not. He is the consensus number 2 with Travis Kelce going ahead. And it kind of reminds me of like Jonathan Taylor last year or DeAndre Swift last year, like coming after the year. We were like, these guys are exciting. These guys really flashed as rookies, and early drafters were higher on them than later drafters ended up being. Feels a little like that to me, maybe with the tight ends, where like, it's so hard once you're looking at projections not to have Travis Kelce bump up, because there's a chance that he just gets a ton of target volume. But in terms of like the direction that these guys' careers are going, maybe we should be more excited about Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, it's been methodical with Kelce, like you said, where thankfully it's only been a little bit of regression each year, but it's been like steady. And it's hard not to feel like maybe not like a total production cliff is coming, but just the cliff from the Travis Kelce we know. Seems like we're almost there. Whereas Mark Andrews had been like hinting at a season like last year for so long. I mean, 3rd most yards in the history of the tight end position last year. And he's just so important to this offense. We know like the passing volume is going to decline. That's a kind of a big deal. But there's just so little. Even if they added Julio Jones, there's still be so little viable target competition that I do feel more comfortable. Even if it feels point chasey to some of the show, I do feel more comfortable with Mark Andrews over Travis Kelce.
Are we? I feel like we might be downplaying the level that the Ravens want to retreat to running the football, because it's not like Andrews was like a fringe player 2 years ago and then last year became his team's very obvious number one receiver, for target share purposes. His target share was up 1% compared to 2020. His air yards share was up 2%. It's better. It's impressive that he did that while the team also passed more, but it wasn't like he was dynamically such a different player than he had been in previous years. His yards per route run was also basically in line with his career average, as was his yards per target. He was better, but it wasn't to the degree that I thought he was a different player. A lot of his production, when you just look at the market share and his efficiency, was essentially just from the uptick in passing volume. Now, to be able to sustain higher efficiency at higher volume is impressive and alludes to his talent. I believe he is one of the 2 to 3 most talented tight ends. But I mean, he will get hit like a truck if they return to that the offense they played in 2019 or 20.
I believe his snap share was up last year.
His snaps and routes were up, but it didn't have a large effect on his share of the targets and yards. His snaps and routes were up for sure, though.
He's always.
Go ahead, Kerrane.
Good. No, good.
No, I was just gonna say, to that point, just a few numbers. I mean, just in terms of receptions and yards, his 4 years in the league: 34 receptions, 64 receptions, 58 receptions, 107 receptions. Then he goes 552 yards, 852 yards, 701 yards, 1,361 yards. So it's he absolutely exploded. But I mean, I don't know. I just don't know what the trajectory is from here.
He did stay pretty efficient. He was 3rd in yards per route run at tight end, and the other 2 guys didn't have 1,000 yards receiving. So Kyle is right. Even if it's how much they throw the car in reverse, basically, because the run rate went from 55% to 44% last year. So only 11% might not seem like a lot, but if they went all the way back to 44%, that would be. You'd probably have to rank Travis Kelce higher for sure if you knew for sure that was going to happen.
Yeah, I have in my rankings Kelce 1, Andrews 2, and I was more debating Andrews 2 or 3. I still kept him 2. I still think I ranked him over Pitts, and that's how I take them. But on Underdog right now, they're going 15, just about 15 picks apart. I would take the discount Pitts because I had them closely ranked together. I still took Andrews ahead of him, but it wasn't a 15. It wasn't over a round disparity that early in the draft to me. Because I think we're going to see the target shrink a lot. Like you said, 11% is a massive number of targets.
Kerrane, did you have another spare thought on Andrews before we move to this Ravens backfield?
Well, I did want to just but my point was just about Nick Boyle and his role, and how even in 2020, Nick Boyle was somewhat involved in the offense, which kept Andrews from kind of being this every down tight end. And before that, he had kind of 2 of 3 things. He was highly efficient as a receiver. He's used basically only as a receiver, but he wasn't out there all the time. And that's what you saw in 2021. His snap share was up to 76%. In 2020, it was only 65%. So that's the one, Denny, I think on a podcast recently, was talking about how, he was running routes at the same rate per snap as he always has. That's true. Everything's been kind of the same with Mark Andrews. And most of it last year was that the offense changed what they were doing, but he still had a pretty significant 11% jump in snap rate. And I think that's one reason to stay bullish and continue to mix him in at ADP. I don't think he's overpriced.
Travis Kelce is just an old man. Am I right, folks?
All right, let's go to this Ravens ground game. Given the likely ground heavy approach that we've hinted at, how high are you, Kerrane, on one J.K. Dobbins? What I think we've talked about him a little bit on a recent episode, but maybe not in depth. So I want to get everyone's thoughts on him as well, coming off that knee injury.
He's a type of player that I don't usually aggressively target. We don't know if he's going to play third downs, as Pat mentioned in the article, and he probably won't, given that that brought in Mike Davis and Tyler Beatty, who one of will be active on game days, I assume, and both are kind of receiving down specialists. So That's not great. Plus, it's got Gus Edwards,
Yeah.
so it's a split. So everything kind of says like, but he's really talented if he's healthy, and this offense potentially will be extremely efficient on the ground as they were back in the MVP Lamar days. But, you know, I would still want to be very careful about drafting him if he was going where like he was last year. He's not. He's going more like 5th, 6th. So like I'm drafting him. I'm shocked, but here I am. I'm drafting him in the dead zone. And, you know, late dead zone, I think, you know, he makes sense in these best ball drafts.
It's so weird, the J.K. Dobbins, where we know he's the most talented back in this backfield. We know about how great his real life draft capital was. I mean, he's still only 23 years old. It's just, I just feel like you can't ever assume, no matter how much it makes sense on paper, that a third-year pro with only 153 career touches, for whatever reason that is, you just have to be a little cautious with that. Like, almost to a letter, like we're still always too optimistic about injury comebacks. And this is a fairly standard injury these days, a torn ACL. That's like the only pause I have with J.K. Dobbins. But as Kerrane said, I mean, he's basically going as like a low-end RB2. I think he was the RB22 the last time I checked on Underdog. And like, that's like pretty sensible. Like, there's plenty of risk baked into that. And you're still getting lots of untapped upside at that ADP. And this is weird too, because like Kerrane said, you can't assume third downs with J.K. Dobbins. And you don't even quite know what it's going to be on early downs. We do know like he'll lead the team in touches, but you just don't quite know how much Gus Edwards will get. I've seen the fantasy community try to like manifest a movement like Gus Edwards is going to get cut. I just don't really think that's realistic at all after what happened. There's been a few guys tweeting, Kyle. People are saying, "You heard about this? Anybody seen this?" And I just, after the like production fiasco, like how low on bodies they were, like I can't see that possibly happening. So there's just a lot of like interesting questions of J.K. Dobbins, but there's definitely more unknown upside than like unknown downside with Dobbins.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of Jonathan Taylor, who going into his second year, I was like, of course he's really good, but Nyheim Hines is going to take away work. You know, he can't possibly be that efficient again. And then he's super talented. He just blows your face out the back of your head because he's that good, and you didn't have any of him. And that was a big flaw in my game. And that's why I, didn't have, didn't ship the Millie Maker or whatever on any of the best ball sites. And I think J.K. Dobbins is probably in that same stratosphere of talent. Like you look at his production at Ohio State, he was just elite. He culminates it with, a 300 carry over 2,000 yard season. He was also a good pass catcher. He just doesn't probably profile to do a ton of that in Baltimore, given that they do have pass catching backs behind him. And you typically don't see these running quarterbacks throw to them as much. But like, if there are running backs who I think can surpass their committee status through efficiency, he's kind of the top of the list of the ones that I think are priced at least fairly.
I mean, what if he is the third down back? I mean, that would be amazing.
He should be. He's a very solid pass catcher, and
Someone hasn't watched every touch of Tyler Beatty's college career, and
Tyler Beatty's good. I mean, it's they didn't spend a lot on him. I was disappointed when he landed in Baltimore because he probably should.
I know. I kind of was too.
There. Mm-hmm.
I don't have the numbers, but Dobbins down the stretch the previous year was an absolute machine near the goal line, wasn't he? I mean, he was very good near the goal line and seemed like the goal line guy at that time. But
there's also plenty of times where he wasn't near the goal line and he still found his way into the end zone, which is
didn't he average like over 6 yards per carry, which of course is environment related, but the environment should be very, very good.
Yeah. All right. The points bet win total over under is 9.5. Pat Daugherty, what have you selected?
Yeah, I've hit the over. I mean, that's a number they would have hit all 4 years of Lamar Jackson under center. If it hadn't been for his injury last year, they went 8 and 9. They probably would have gotten to 10 if he hadn't missed 5 games with injury. It's still a deep roster. It's one that can't possibly be as injured as it was last year. It's a good coaching staff. Coaching staff had a little turnover, at least with the defensive coordinator. But it's very difficult to see like the Ravens kind of like, as I said in the article, like regressing to what has really been like their 10 to 11 win mean with John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson. So the over feels very sensible to me with the Ravens.
I like the over as well.
I think that's where I'm at. It's close, but we look at what happened then last year, and it was like you said, biblical. It was very unfortunate, and especially at corner, like they were an elite pass defense for like 3 to 4 consecutive years before last year's just complete injury related debacle. He's done a really good job addressing that through the draft. So I think getting everyone back just like normal injury luck. You don't have to be good with injuries because they're just so bad. Just the regression in the mean there is enough to keep them in play. My only concern is the division probably got a good bit harder. Gaining Deshaun Watson for some amount of time, we would assume right now. No update on that yet. But then losing Ben Roethlisberger, and I know Kenny Pickett isn't great, but I think he'll be better than Ben. So that's kind of my only concern. But they also got a lot better themselves, even if it wasn't via quarterback.
All right, last of 4 teams we're going to hit as we close out this early portion of the alphabet is the Buffalo Bills. Preview was written by Zach Kruger on NBC Sports Edge. And let's start by looking at these Bills' primary pass catchers, Kyle, in particular, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. So how high are you on Davis coming off that absurd playoff breakout? And do you see Diggs rebounding some after a really good year, but not quite up to his 2020 standards season last year?
Yeah, I think I have, Diggs rebounding, but like we're seeing the ADP on Gabe Davis rise a lot, and I think it's rising toward efficiency and not beyond efficiency, at least at this point in terms of where the market is pricing him, because like he was a very good college prospect. He was a second-year breakout at a D1 school, an early declare, and then he's been nothing but productive, even on limited opportunity. But just like one of 24 receivers to ever get 1,000 yards and 10 TDs for the age of 23. He's been really good, and we just haven't seen the role yet. There's really not, we could have said this last year too. There's really not a reason he doesn't play nearly every snap for a team that is just, the best of the best when it comes to, this is the fun analytic football, right? Analytics football. They throw it deep. They throw it often. They were 3rd in pass rate over expectation last year. They're also positive pass rate over expectation in the red zone. That's despite having one of the best red zone running quarterbacks. So we really are getting the best of all of it with this team. So I think relative to ADP, not versus each other, I feel like it's like fishy to just buy into the hype of Gabe Davis because it's coming off of one great game, but it's not one great game. It's really 2 seasons building towards something, in my opinion. So I like both of them. Like, you should be drafting a lot of Bills if you can. Versus ADP, I've found myself getting a little more Gabe Davis.
With Gabe Davis, like you said, it's the perception, not perception. No one's really pushing the narrative, but like, it's just not a 1-game wonder where he forced his way onto the field as a 4th-round rookie. That always really makes you take notice. It was weirdly, not involved a lot in the first half of last season because they just were intent on featuring Emmanuel Sanders, and they finally dialed back Emmanuel Sanders. Then he just starts having huge games again, Gabriel Davis. And just when it comes to like evaluating an 8-catch, 201-yard, 4-touchdown divisional round performance, I do feel like if you can go one of 2 ways with it. I feel like you're probably better off over-interpreting it than under-interpreting it. Like a guy just going totally nuts. Who, again, as Kyle said, had been building towards something like that. It wasn't like it was just like out of the blue. Where Gabe Davis is someone where there will be reasons for like hesitance, but I feel like he's someone that kind of worth like getting out over your skis on.
Sean Siegel's done some good work about, like 4th, 5th-year breakouts where those tend to come from guys who weren't early draft picks. And Gabe Davis only entering year 3. But I think the point being that, like, if you are not selected with one of these premium picks, it takes you this extra time to just even prove that you should be involved. And that's what he spent his rookie year doing. Like, hey, you should play me. And then in his 2nd year, he's still proving that point. Like, you should play me instead of Emmanuel Sanders. And for much of the season, the team inexplicably disagreed with that. He finally gets out on the field. He was highly efficient throughout his entire sophomore season. Not so efficient as a rookie, not terrible. Very efficient as a sophomore. I think, you throw that game in with everything else, you average it all together, and you look at a second season that looks like the type of season that might be the year before a true 3rd-year breakout. So I like Gabriel Davis a lot. I don't think, he's the type of guy where I've reached for by like 6 picks, and I feel fine about it. I do also take Diggs ahead of ADP because it gets in that there's like a certain range of running backs kind of at the back end of the first where I'm like, I'll get whoever's left on the back end. I'm taking Diggs, so I like both these top weapons. We know this offense is going to be explosive. You got to get pieces.
With Diggs, there was a feeling like for much of the season, we kept talking about how his slow start. You look up at the end of the year, he's got more than 100 catches, more than 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. And that was, a disappointment based on his previous year. The quarterback of this team is a guy named Josh Allen. He was used a ton
That's a
as
Jags
a rusher.
defensive lineman, actually. You misspoke.
Used a ton as a rusher last year, 122 carries, 763 yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground. Kerrane, do you worry at all, like I do, for maybe no good reason, about the Bills potentially dialing that back at all? Like, do you think that was potentially the peak and we could have seen the peak of Josh Allen rushing already, or is that overthinking it?
No, I don't think it's overthinking it. I mean, we do have this coaching change with Brian Daboll gone now, and from what I was reading, it seems like, Allen wants to be maybe running more than the coaches want him to. And also I think it was Joe Buscaglia of The Athletic was saying that, there were times where McDermott was not happy with how much they were with how much they were not running the ball. And so you could see maybe McDermott having a bit more of his fingerprints on this offense in general beyond Josh Allen rushing, maybe Josh Allen passing a little bit less. I think my guess would be we see some games this year where we're panicking a little bit, probably panicking when we shouldn't be. But I bet we get some like Twitter meltdowns of what happened to the Bills, because there's going to be games, right, where Ken Dorsey's like still kind of growing into his role, and McDermott is, saying, hey, I don't want this Daboll stuff where you pass through it no matter what. I sometimes want to establish. So maybe we see a little bit less of Josh Allen overall, and we see a little bit more running through the running backs. Maybe we get some of that with James Cook as receiving, but potentially also just some more handoffs.
I will say with Allen and the rushing is that it was a little telling that after their lowest moment, the humiliation to the Patriots at home, that they kind of committed more to Allen as a rusher after that. And he had some of his biggest rushing efforts after that, and like some of like indispensable efforts on the ground after that, where at least like Kerrane said, maybe they'll dial it back when they can. Like, you don't need to have him running against the Jets. But that was pretty well proven at this point. Like maybe the most indefensible part of their entire offense, which is close to indefensible in a lot of different areas. So maybe the floor sometimes goes a little lower than we'd like, but the rushing ceiling, I think, won't be as high as ever.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, lowest moment is losing to Urban Meyer. Probably the worst coach.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the history of the NFL. But, losing to divisional rivals, not great either, especially when it has high playoff impact implications. I kind of agree, though, that at one point, I've already got the tweet fired up. Look at how they massacred my boy when we see, the running backs combined for 30 carries.
That's the tweet I'm talking about.
Yeah, they've won, kind of a relatively easy game, and you hear one of Mike Kafka or something comes out after the game. He's like, yeah, we just really thought it was a good game to put it to him on the ground. And I do it was the best season of Josh Allen as a runner, kind of by a clear margin, right? We had just incredible, the incredible 300-100 performance, I believe we got from him. And that's probably not the plan for a guy who's, the face of your franchise, hopefully for a decade or more, when he can also throw it so well. And you have the receiving talent to do it. So, yeah, I do think we are not going to see 700 yards on the ground again, but I still think he'll be one of maybe the best dual threat quarterback in the league in terms of fantasy production. Maybe real life, too. That's also very reasonable.
Kyle's got like 3 different variations of that tweet, in his drafts folder.
I have it scheduled already. I just have it up on TweetDeck, and I hope this is the right week because it's coming out.
It's one thing to predict that we might feel that way, but for Kyle to predict the exact tweet needed is just magic.
Well, the backfield, the possibility of more of this backfield has already come up, so let's talk about it. Devin Singletary had 36% of his yards from scrimmage and 6 of his 8 touchdowns during the last 4 weeks of the season. So, Pat Daugherty, how do you weigh that late season surge, as well as the arrival of second-round running back James Cook, when you consider who to draft from this backfield and when to draft them?
You mean that was another post-Patriots adjustment that they made, like an amazing adjustment. Like we have to finally dispense with this 3-man committee where no one can get in rhythm, no one knows their role, no one can get that hot hand, folks, which is very real. Am I right? The hot hand is real, definitely a thing that exists. But the running game was much more effective if they just committed to Devin Singletary, and he was the right guy to commit to because he's just better than Zach Moss, who is not good. Matt Breida, not good whatsoever. And I think he'll be relatively uncontested on early downs, at least to begin the year. Devin Singletary, where the third down thing, I would say more concerning than James Cook's drafting selection was the fact that they thought they had J.D. McKissic signed, like a real deal, like NFL third down back, like a guy who there would have been zero question that he would be the third down back. Where James Cook, there's at least like, can the rookie actually earn this role? Because a Super Bowl or bust team is not going to just like give this role to him. Like he's going to have to come out and earn it. As it's very dicey a lot of times for these young quarterbacks trying to pass protect for someone like Josh Allen. So I think that Devin Singletary could actually have close to a 3-down role. I mean, Duke Johnson is also there. Duke Johnson is also a threat, of course, on third downs. But I do think Devin Singletary is like another year he's probably destined to be a little underdrafted, because I think now there's not going to be any Zach Moss like randomly stealing like 2 or 3 touchdowns in one year. I think he'll just be much more comfortable with like the early down. I guess Josh Allen could still steal those, but pretty good setup for Devin Singletary in early downs. I don't think it's like necessarily like written in stone that he's not going to be the third down back. And like too, it's his final year of his contract, and they're not going to care about like keeping him fresh or whatever. Like, yeah, whatever. He's going to be gone next year. So I think a pretty good overall setup for Devin Singletary this year.
I'd push back a little bit on Singletary as a pass catcher. He's just not good at that. And he's
been better than the people who are on the roster. And like James Cook, I feel like it's a little oversold. Like the fact that he wasn't such a huge early down back, he never had like 1,000-yard season or anything like that. He only caught 67 balls in 4 years, which is more than a lot of backs catch, but he never even had like a 30 catch season. So I'm just like, I just don't know. Like a team that's Super Bowl or bust, I just don't know if they'll give that role to a third down rookie.
We can play a little game to close this out. There were 67 qualified running backs in terms of targets. And where do you think Singletary ranked in yards per route?
He wasn't that efficient, folks.
Take a guess.
Can I guess the yards per route run that he had?
Hell yes, you can.
I'm going to guess 0.92.
Oh, it's got to be over 1.
It was lower than that?
It's not even close. It was 0.6, and he was 66 in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run out of 67 players. He's just
and number 67 was?
I think it was Sony Michel for at least yards per route run. Yikes. It was, yeah. Yeah, right. He's just not particularly good at that. And that's okay, because he's a good runner. I think he's good between the tackles. And I think Pat, you pointed out that they signaled that that's the back they want. They want the pass catching back. They tried to get McKissic. They brought in Duke Johnson. And then they go out and get Cook. Like, that's the obvious role they want for him. And I'm kind of excited to take that guy paired up with Josh Allen.
Yeah, I forget, even at the traditional, sometimes non-telling metrics, I forgot he averaged 5.7 yards per catch, which even for a running back is very bad. Very, very bad.
He's kind of got like the make and miss, but then he's like, that was pretty cool, huh? It's like, does it do anything afterwards? Like, you got to keep running.
Well, I mean, to that point, though, I do think you guys highlighted it. It seems like if you're trying to get a piece of this Bills offense, the backfield seems like the clear, cheapest, and easiest way to get a part of it.
Well,
you want the very cheapest, you go Isaiah McKenzie, who his catch of passes from Josh Allen in minicamp, which means he's playing some with the first team. And Jameson Crowder is also very cheap. I think you can tack on one of those guys. You're gonna have to pick one, because they're both not gonna hit. They're sharing the same role. But I think one of those guys probably does have some value. We've seen a lot of value out of that slot role in Buffalo.
Kerrane, do you have a preference between the two? I've been taking McKenzie a lot. I just kind of think he's better. But...
I've taken Crowder some, just because I feel like he's like more Beasley-esque, and like he's just eventually going to like earn the trustworthy role. But I've been reconsidering that a little bit. Like, I probably need to make sure to prioritize McKenzie a bit more, who I have been taking, but just not quite as much, because he's just so much cheaper. So like what I need is just so much less. So I like both.
I think the Bills with McKenzie like have a hard cap in mind for his touches always. Really, I feel like they just don't think he's big enough to withstand the rigors. And like when Beasley was hurt, like they didn't mind doing it because they had no other option. But it seems like they have like a number in mind for him, then they never want to exceed it.
I had to double check, and it was not in fact a fever dream that in week 16 Isaiah McKenzie had 11 catches, 125 yards, and a touchdown.
That happened
during a 20 catch season. That was crazy.
We were a different country then, a different people then.
All right, the points bet over under on the Bills wins is 11.5. Zach Kruger, who wrote this column, took the under, guys. What is your move?
It's the year of the Bills. They're going to go 13-4, and I believe 13 is more than 11.5. So I'll take the over.
Our Bills over.
I'm gonna go Zach on this one. I had the under. I think their division was probably one of the biggest turnaround candidates, getting a completely revamped Dolphins team, aside from Tua, who's the same but gets better weapons, and then both the other quarterbacks going into their second year in an NFL offense. So I think their division gets a lot harder. They're still the best team in it, but I think it's close, and they don't get over that number.
That's the thing. The division's improved, but I think they'll still go 5-1 in the division.
All right, you can check out these team previews in their full glory and the rest of the team previews, which will be rolling out over an undisclosed period of weeks and months on NBC Sports Edge. Guys, anything else to promote on the site beyond just these team previews?
Nope. Last week of USFL, I'll have one final thing for that. And I've teased this for 2 consecutive shows that I've been on. We'll finally do a best ball playoff stacking thing. It'll be out this weekend.
All right, Kerrane, you look content. You're good.
Kerrane looks very content.
I've got this Bengals preview coming up next week. That I'll be right next week.
I think he was writing some of the Bengals preview right there.
He was.
I was thinking about it in my head, just thinking about Joe Burrow.
The word fantasy.
He's up to 65 words now.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you listen. Take a moment to rate and review us as well. I want to say thanks to everyone for listening and watching live. Kerrane, Kyle, Pat, thanks to all of you. I will see you guys next week.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for all the latest fantasy and sports betting advice from NBC Sports Edge. And don't forget to sign up for NBC Sports Edge Plus to get the best-in-class draft guides, as well as season-long fantasy, DFS, and sports betting tools that will give you the edge.